Nintendo and piracy seem to go hand in hand. Of course, piracy is a staple when it comes to any form of media, but Nintendo appears to make a concerted effort to combat piracy more than the rest of its competition. From actively working to take down ROM sites, or even including a broad statement on the company's position on piracy on their official website, for many, many years, the Big N makes sure that with each new hardware release to their name, they at least in some small part try and halt those that would illegally download or purchase counterfeit games for their system, and especially their handhelds. And let's not forget that they deleted 3,500 YouTube videos from a guy who just wanted to put the soundtracks online, even though they don't put them online anywhere else. Just thought it might be worth noting. Of course, the DS was a major player in the gaming space when piracy hit, and it could be argued that this rampant piracy contributed to the DS and its most popular games spreading through the popular consciousness by word of mouth. When cartridges like the R4 hit the market, games such as Pokemon, Mario & Luigi, and even Club Penguin was sampled by pirates. And these titles made their own efforts on the software side to try and combat pirates at every possible turn. The DS had many successes, some of which were original games, but a few of them were ports from earlier consoles. Chrono Trigger is no doubt one of the most reputable RPGs of all time and one of my personal favorites, originally releasing on the Super Nintendo. The DS version is held in high regard, and this version's anti-piracy measures are also no doubt inspired by the original release on the SNES as well. Even in a pirated version, the game will play completely fine during the opening moments, where the player attends the Millennial Fair. It is here that the game's time-traveling elements are introduced, setting the player on an adventure throughout the past, present, and the future. At least, that would be the case in normal circumstances. But if the game detects that it has in fact been pirated, the time gate will refuse to display, and the game will instead freeze. What makes this copy protection more interesting is that this is the exact same form of protection that was put in place for the original SNES release, showing us that even in the future, some things may remain the same. Although soft-locking the player is just one form of copy protection, it's a pretty common solution. After all, what better way to frustrate somebody that's pirated a game than to simply make their game freeze when the going gets good? Another soft-lock method that is popular among developers is to take an element of the game that is intrinsic to making progress and then simply making sure it doesn't work. Club Penguin Elite Penguin Force Herbert's Revenge served as a sequel to the earlier DS Club Penguin game, and this included protection to prevent piracy. Rather than just locking the game in place if it was detected that the player was running an illegal copy, it would instead prevent the player from accessing the Puffle Whistle throughout every mission. As the player needs the Puffle Whistle to call the 7 different elite Puffles, of course, an action required to make progress, the game becomes entirely unbeatable. But at least in this instance, the player could get a small taste of what the game has to offer, unlike some other DS titles. Capcom's Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is an interesting and somewhat lesser known title, which had an anti-piracy measure that would lull the player into feeling like they were getting the game rolling, only to halt them at the first instance. If the game detects that it's being played illegitimately, none of the usual in-game text will be displayed at all. This means that players will not only lose out on the game's story, but they'll essentially have no context or instruction at all to help them solve the game's puzzles. It is still possible to play the game, but players must already be aware of what they have to do. In other words, they would already have to have played the game legitimately in the past. Speaking of Capcom titles, do you guys remember Mega Man?
Must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
It's been a number of years since the Blue Bomber was in the spotlight, but during the era of the DS, a new spin-off series was created called Mega Man Star Force. This was a follow-up to the other spin-off Mega Man series, Mega Man Battle Network. With a series of games that aim to portray a fully connected world where the borders between digital and physical space merge, it's not too surprising that piracy would be one element of the game that the developers were keenly aware of. And this game has a rather interesting bit of anti-piracy, in which the game will repeatedly display the same message. Hey, hurry up, touch the train, kid. While not quite the same as
all we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ.
But it's close enough. Whenever the player tries to skip this text, it will simply be displayed again, forcing the player into a position where they cannot progress, and they will simply have to quit the game. And then, go back to the GBA temp to see if the new patch has been released yet, not that we know anything about that. Another game which halts the progress of pirates is the sequel to Ace Attorney Investigation Miles Edgeworth, Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which was released exclusively in Japan. Considering the nature of the game's goal, investigations into legal cases in which you must thoroughly dissect statements made by various characters to discern who is guilty of committing a crime, this game's anti-piracy might seem a bit out of character. The title allows pirates to play the game almost entirely, though with the handicap of all of the game's dialogue being displayed in the Borginian language, a fictional language from the series that utilizes symbols instead of letters. This doesn't apply to all areas of the game, as some parts will remain intact, such as various buttons, character names, and the evidence that the player collects. Considering the game's genre as a visual novel investigative adventure involving information correlation, another harsh part of this anti-piracy is that the in-game organizer, where evidence and character profiles are stored, will have all of the descriptions for these items be replaced with a series of several crosses. This will probably make it pretty obvious to pirates that the game isn't playing ball, but some other titles were a bit more sly about tackling pirates. Dragon Quest V: Hand of the Heavenly Bride released in Japan in July 2008, and came loaded with a sly trap for pirates. In the days following the game's release, Japanese message boards began to be flooded with players asking how long it took before the player's ship arrived at the port towards the start of the game. For legitimate players, this sequence only lasts a few minutes, but for pirates, that ship will sail continuously forever, with some pirates waiting for hours before they realized they'd become stuck in a loop. Players began to suspect that this was a form of copy protection, but other players believed that it may be a bug in the game's programming. These doubts were soon put to rest by Square Enix themselves, with their PR department telling Yahoo Japan, if gamers are playing a pirated copy, the ship in the opening scene will never reach port. This is an anti-piracy measure we decided to implement. Unfortunately for Square Enix, these measures were quickly worked around, with patches and cheat codes being circulated that got players past the infinite loop. This was quite a clever attempt though, and ironically stole time from pirates that they'll never get back. This isn't quite the case with one of Square Enix's other DS releases, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles: Ring of Fates. This time around, the game will actually boot and act as though everything is cool, but it really isn't. Pirates would find themselves enjoying their time getting to grips with the title, but it won't last long. After just 20 minutes of gameplay, the game comes to a rather abrupt end, and the text, "Thank you for playing," will be displayed, almost as though the player had just finished a timed demo of what legit players experience, rather than the full game. This seems like quite a clever method of anti-piracy, as pirates got just a taste of the full experience and may have considered actually purchasing their own copy. While we're on the topic of Japanese RPGs, let's talk about the most successful in the entire genre. Pokemon Black and White made only a small effort to counteract piracy, but it was a very effective one. This entry into the Pokemon franchise actually included a new feature that involved a special bit of hardware in the game's cartridge, an infrared communicator that would be used to link with other copies of the game, something that isn't normally included in a DS game's cartridge. Of course, this gave the developers a unique element to work with in official cartridges that wouldn't be present on any flashcards or emulators. So, they were able to use this to check if the hardware the game was being played on is legitimate. Throughout gameplay, checks were made within the game's code to make sure that this communicator is present, such as when leaving the Pokemon screen, either returning to the overworld or looking at the status of selected Pokemon. If it's found that the infrared capabilities aren't present, then the game will trigger an anti-piracy measure that results in Pokemon being unable to gain experience, and at random points in the player's journey, the game will simply crash. Stopping players from gaining experience may seem entirely debilitating, but it is possible to beat the game without gaining any. Players can simply use lower level Pokemon to damage and catch wild Pokemon that are a higher level, and ultimately work their way up to catching legendary Pokemon and taking on the Elite Four, albeit with the aid of many health items. The same anti-piracy measures can be experienced in the game's sequel, Pokemon Black and White 2, where the infrared communicator would make a reappearance. Most emulators would quickly find solutions to prevent these issues from occurring, likely through spoofing the infrared communicator and stopping the checks from determining that the specified hardware is missing. Another method of solving this, however, is through cheat codes, which could be implemented into flashcards to disable the standard routine checks. It really didn't take long for the protection to be squashed, as with pretty much most of the anti-piracy measures you'll see in this video, but even stopping would-be pirates from playing the game for just a short period after release can result in some purchasing the game out of anticipation. Did you also know that Pokemon Yellow's Safari Zone has a small secret not found in any other version of Gen 1? Or that Splatoon has a secret Easter egg referencing Tupac and Biggie Smalls? Click the video on screen for an entire hour of Nintendo facts just like these. And thanks again to the users at the cutting room floor who documented most of these anti-piracy features in today's video. Would you pay for a Nintendo music streaming service? While they are well within their right to remove all of their music from YouTube, some of that shit slaps, dude, and I want to listen to it.